Thomas, I'm kind of curious. What's your opinion? Is it a problem if bedroom producers are starting to do Atmos? People that don't have like access to a big studio, or what do you think about that?
Well, you know my take on it. Atmos to the people.
Hello, everybody out there. Welcome to the April episode of our podcast, Spatial Audio Monthly, where we talk about all the news in the world of spatial and immersive audio. I'm your host, Michael Wagner, and next to me is my co-host, Sam Hawking.
Hello, everybody.
Today we have a very special guest. Last week marked the 1-year anniversary of the release of the Dolby Atmos Composer. And I think it's fair to say that the Composer is one of the most important releases in the spatial audio world last year. We're therefore very lucky to have the one and only Thomas Fiedler, creator and developer of the Dolby Atmos Composer, as our guest in this episode. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
We are going to talk about the history of the Composer, where it came from, and how Thomas got the idea for creating it, and maybe a little bit about something about the futures. And there were a couple of questions from our Discord community, and I'm going to kind of sprinkle them into this discussion so that we can talk about those things as well. But before we get into that discussion, let's first talk about what's new in the world of spatial audio. Sam, anything that caught your attention?
Mm-hmm. So the big one in spatial audio would be DaVinci Resolve is now got a beta of version 19, like a public beta, and they've added ambisonics. So you know where you create your main Atmos or MPEG-H bus or whatever. You've now got an option to create ambisonic buses.
So you can you can route ambisonics buses into the Atmos.
Yeah, and there's a binaural monitoring. So that's been quite in terms of spatial production. They pretty much covered. Even though I can't stand working actually in the program itself for music, for film it's probably a lot different. But for music,
it's my editing software.
Ambisonics, MPEG, Dolby, Surround. What's the other one that it supports? So yeah, but anyway, it's if you've got an account already license, then it's definitely worth exploring that because.
And that's in the free. That is in the studio version, right? So you have to have
studio version. Sorry, yeah, studio version.
Yeah,
but it's a perpetual license with DaVinci, isn't it? So
it is, and actually you get it for free with some of the hardware. So if you shell out a lot of money for one of the cameras, you get DaVinci Resolve for free.
Yeah,
and I got my license with the Speed Editor. That's actually a really nice piece of controlling hardware.
Good excuse to buy more hardware. So I think it's a very powerful DAW in itself, and they've now added VST 3, which I don't think it had before. And also what do you call it? Side channels into the plugins as well, so you can sidechain.
Oh, you can sidechaining.
Which was never possible before, which was really quite.
And quite frankly, it's also a little bit unusual for video editing software. Right?
Yeah, no, very. So this. In terms of the overall,
I think didn't they also include the Sony Real Audio kind of thing? Because some people asked me to make a video about that. Or was this? Do I have that wrong?
I might not have seen that. The ambisonics bit caught my eye.
Okay.
Is it? Yeah, it is. Yeah, Sony. Sorry, it's MPEG-H and Sony 360, but I'm not sure in how far you can get through the Sony 360.
Yeah, it's probably just. It's
I don't know
probably
if you can
just
get all
a
the way
channel
to the ADM. So yeah. Might
It's
just be
probably
a
just the
mixed
channel
thing.
configuration for
Yeah.
the MPEG gauge. Yeah.
Sure.
People keep
Yeah.
asking me kind of to do a video about and kind of
Yeah, no, I think-
you could actually do ambisonic. I mean, we had Audio Brewers on our podcast at the very beginning. I think it was the first episode or the second episode, the first guest, and he Alejandro was very kind of proud that he actually managed to get his plugins to work in DaVinci
work.
Resolve even before the
Yeah. It's always had agnostic channels and buses. So theoretically, as long as you set the channel count correctly, the agnostic channel capability would theoretically support whatever plugin you put on there. So I've used that quite a lot to work around problems. Rather, especially if you're working with video and you don't want to use Bejewel or plug Bejewel, so that's been definitely due an update. I think probably some of your earlier videos were DaVinci Resolve as well, so that would be
it's
quite
actually one
interesting
of
to look
my
back what's changed.
It's one of my more popular videos because some bigger developer actually kind of shared that. So people keep asking me about DaVinci Resolve, and I haven't actually. The problem really is that I use DaVinci Resolve as my main video editing software, so I don't really want to mess around with it because otherwise I have to. So that's really
to be honest, I do a little bit in it, but mainly I'm just in the Fairlight page.
Now the Fairlight kind of the automation and everything, that's always a nightmare. But I probably have to look at that again.
So that's fun. I think that's definitely been quite a big update, although it should be if you're going from 18 to 19. Still some more things to play with there. I've played a lot with Pentio 6, which had a significant update. I don't own it, but I downloaded or they gave me an iLok trial. It's not changed a significant amount. I think they've changed the algorithm that does the decorrelation. I think maybe I was under a slight misconception that it was simpler than it is, and it is actually doing quite a bit more than you realise under the hood. It's not just a straight kind of channel distribution and basic decorrelation. So I think it might be worth more.
Yeah, it is
more than it actually seems on the surface.
I mean that is an interesting one. That is an interesting one. It's kind of it always puzzles me a little. So it's not like kind of we're going to talk when we talk about the Dolby Atmos Composer and Thomas Leder. Kind of one thing that I always liked about the stuff that comes out of Fiedler Audio. Thomas thinks about everything, right? So it's with the Pentio or Pantio. I'm never quite sure which one of those. It's sort of this slightly kind of nerdy thing that you're never quite sure because the interface looks like it was done by a couple of students and you're never quite sure what's under the hood. So that's that always puzzled me and the fact that it's really expensive.
No, but I think the more I dug into it, because I was actually trying to work out exactly what it was doing under the hood by sailoring the channels and looking at it through a scope and things like this, and I thought it was mainly just doing kind of like a multi-band sort of filtering sort of thing, but I think it's much more spectral domain that it's working in because there's quite a large latency involved using it. You certainly couldn't really use it in a live loop back sort of sense because it'd just be too slow. But quite interesting what it does and how it does it. I think decorrelation is its main selling feature. It's very good at doing that. But on the flip side of that, if you put a stereo track into it and you essentially output stereo, it doesn't null. So even its input, it gets is getting adjusted some way, which I thought was a bit strange. I thought, well, if you're not actually upmixing, why are you doing anything to the signal? So anyway, that's all interesting interesting things. But it's kind of them to give me another trial on that, so that was good. So I think I had a previous previous version on it, but it's not something I would use enough to to buy it. But certainly, commercial sense, I can see where it comes in a lot of use. You've got limited assets to mix a full song. You might only have an instrumental or an a cappella, and maybe one of the guitar solos, and that's all you've got. So
so it is a very specialized tool. So kind of the people kind of who need that know that they need it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the two main ones from me this month. I don't know if you've noticed anything.
I don't know. Did we talk about the Studio One kind of last month? I completely forgot. Kind of there was like the addition of the Apple Spatial Audio.
YouTube videos and the podcast kind of blur into one in my mind because I watched both of them. So. I think we covered it. Yeah.
So that was an interesting one. Now the one thing I think that comes from me, and that's actually for me was an interesting one, was the addition of Dolby Atmos to Mixbus. And the way they actually did that, I found was really interesting because they I think they were limited from the way Mixbus is implemented. Mixbus is essentially kind of built on Ardour, right? Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah.
Ardour, right?
Ardour, yeah.
Ardour.
And that invented Jack Audio as well.
Yeah, you said that. That's sort of the Ardour developer.
Davis,
also the one.
Not Gary Davis. Somebody Davis, yeah.
Yeah. We should get him on the podcast at some point.
Definitely. It's a stereo DAW Mixbus, isn't it, as well?
It is a stereo DAW, and that makes it so interesting because they had to build essentially something on top of a stereo DAW. And the way they did it, I think, was a compromise, but in the end ended up really interesting. And this is actually one of the things that I'd like to bring Thomas into the discussion, because what they did is they avoided the Atmos bed completely. So you only, because you don't have multi-channel tracks, you just don't have that in Ardour, and if you don't have it in Ardour, you don't have it in Mixbus. So they have these all they really do is objects, and the upside of that is that it is super simple. Essentially, you press one button and everything turns into Atmos. That's all there is to it. And the thing that I found interesting is, and that I think is just a consequence of the way it was implemented, is that because of the way Ardour works, they had to have a stereo master bus in addition to the immersive master bus. So they have everything double. And that essentially means anybody who is working on Mixbus, all they really need to do if they want to kind of turn an old production into Dolby Atmos, they have to just kind of press this one button and they don't have to really do anything, provided they are not doing a lot of master bus processing, which they usually shouldn't. But kind of if they don't do that, then there's nothing much they really need to do. They just kind of press this one button, export everything, and they have an Atmos file. So it's I think it's something. It's something that I found interesting because it is such a low barrier of entry. It's so incredibly low. It's just pressing one button and you're done.
It has a speaker output capability, doesn't it? It does have, like, you can route to 7.1.4 on the output side, on the B-chain side.
On the output side, you actually, and I'm actually kind of, as we are recording this, I just uploaded a video about that. So it can output in 7.1.4 and essentially keeps the stereo session completely intact. And I'm curious about that, and Thomas, maybe you can chime in about that. I had a number of people talk to me about that this actually is a problem, because what it does is it oversimplifies everything, and the result of that is going to be that. Because essentially people are not really buying into Atmos, they are just kind of pumping out Atmos mixes because they have to, and then everything kind of just sounds awful. And as a result of that, nobody wants to listen. I actually had one commenter on my YouTube channel actually even kind of tell me that I'm actually kind of not destroying, but kind of being detrimental to Atmos, because I promote the idea that this is something that everybody can do, and there are people out there that think
I think that's
Look.
possibly where Mixbus are looking at it as well, though. There's quite a big gap between the stereo session that somebody's already made and then getting that through an Atmos engineer and then distributed. That there's a costly gap and it's a big gap in knowledge.
And
so I think even if all you've done is create an ADM with essentially a load of stereo objects, at least the sound of that is how the artist has imagined it. And so you could then take that onto, not necessarily obviously in Mixbus, but you could, spread that out once you're in a proper Atmos room. In stereo, you're not going to be able to judge anything anyway.
But essentially, kind of you could still do like the Apple Spatial, for example, right? So you could do that with AirPods and have head tracking.
Yeah.
So kind of Thomas, I'm kind of curious. What's your opinion? Is it a problem if bedroom producers are starting to do Atmos? People that don't have like access to a big studio, or what do you think about that? I was kind of taken aback by the idea a little, but it does make sense, but at the same time, I don't really like it. The idea that you should kind of limit that to professional producers and professional studios, so that the quality is where people would like it to be. What's your take on that? I'm kind of curious.
Well, you know my take on it. Atmos to the people. So, look, if we think back to history, when stereo started, everyone was mixing mono. When stereo started, the first albums, the professionals who had to now feed 2 channels then instead of 1, so they didn't have a real good idea of how to make it, and so the first things were rather funny. The first albums were rather funny until someone. I think it was, I don't know where it was, but it was very early on the stereo history. Someone left 2 microphones in a recording room, and one was panned hard left and the other was panned hard right. And then some people were playing or something doing, and the guy was sitting in the studio and listening. What is that? So because he had his complete stereo, he had a complete stereo image, and then an explosion in the head started, and a creativity explosion. So then they thought, oh, there's something coming from the center in a stereo image. That means there is something kind of a phantom source in the middle. And then the thing went on in its development.
And all the older records are hard panned left and right. They treat the stereo image as if it's mono.
There is no image. There is no image. Yeah, no. They're thinking in 2 channels, but they don't think in an image, in a stage, today we have so much developed when regarding this. We're thinking of phantom size. We're thinking of depth. That means when you put something more reverb, then it gets deeper into the room and whatnot. And but at this time it was starting. And I think regarding Atmos, we are somehow at the same position. People are learning. Even professional mix engineers often do crap in Atmos when you compare it to the stereo version. I mean, we have to admit it. The format has a lot of potential, but one has to learn how to actually fill it with something meaningful, depending on the musical style, depending on psychoacoustical knowledge and applying this psychoacoustic knowledge, which of course is something we have to learn now about perception. How do we perceive a sound source in space? What factors come in which determine how we perceive distance and whatnot? I mean, there are so many things, and I mean, we have to learn that. And regarding Mixbus, I only saw the one video. I didn't download and play around with it myself. I saw that it is, according to the video, very limited. Of course, it's very easy. You switch on, and then you have your panners where you can fly around with your objects, and then that goes somehow magically to the Atmos file. And I think on the one hand, it's quite limiting. because if you want to go into details in your mixing, then you quickly get to the limits of that. On the other hand, it's a statement which I find rather interesting, because Atmos should be easy. It should become easy, so that everyone can start with it. And if we want to make Atmos something which has a wider audience, we cannot rely on a few professionals. We have to take in more and more people, because anyway, the music making world is more democratized than, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, where if you want to have a decent record, you had to go to a studio, you have to rent the studio, and then there was an engineer, and there was rooms, microphones, and all that stuff what most bands couldn't afford. So now you can buy a computer, have a lot of software, and do a lot of things by yourself. You have software who can take out the reverb from your bad recordings, and then you can tweak it and make it somehow okay. So you can do a lot of stuff yourself. And I think if people start making Atmos in their homes and sharing it with their friends, it really helps to get the Atmos experience across to the consumers, because that's another thing. I mean, if you look, I mean, Apple boasts 90% of our listeners listen to Dolby Atmos or something like that, but they don't know. They hear it, they like the music, maybe, but they don't know that internally the algorithms, if they hear with headphones, they just switched over to Atmos by default. There's an Atmos version of the mix available, but they don't notice. So people also have to be educated to actually hear what's the difference, and also the mixes have to get to the point where they are truly a difference compared to the stereo mixes. So if you want to do something serious on Mixbus, you still need the Dolby Atmos Composer.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things that I like about that approach, because it is very low entry barrier. So kind of it's very easy to push that button, and then essentially you start playing around with it, and then you start to realize the limitations, and that's the moment where you think about what can I do in addition to that, right? So it's not like this huge thing that I need to familiarize myself with. I can just kind of switch it on, and if I don't like it, I switch it off again. And by the way, if I switch it off, essentially kind of everything comes back to the way it was before, so you didn't destroy anything. So kind of I find that, and then essentially comes the moment where you see, I need the Dolby Atmos Composer, because that actually works in Mixbus. So you can so for those Mixbus users out there, if you're not happy with the way kind of Atmos is implemented on Mixbus, the Dolby Atmos Composer works on Mixbus. You can use that one.
And you can also have practically the same approach, like what you have now built in version 10, is you can actually take a stereo mix and build Atmos on top, and you can always switch back and forth by just deactivating and deactivating the Dolby Atmos Composer plugin on the master channel without destroying, without touching anything of your stereo mix. You just put it on top, and you can create your Dolby Atmos version. And we have on our YouTube channel, we have videos, and we also have demo session for that, on how to do that, step-by-step description. So it's not so difficult, and you have many more options what you can do.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say you could almost that initial state of loading the Dolby Atmos Beam plugin onto the stereo track, and that automatically connects into the composer in the renderer.
Yeah,
that initial state is essentially where Mixbus kind of doesn't end, but it's a similar starting point. The stereo field is still there. You haven't panned anything by default. But Composer, you can take it through into the multi-channel, and almost an immersive panning as well, where you're using multiple objects panned at the same time rather than just two or just one.
Yeah,
which is not. I think is it Audio Brewers said if you're only panning with one or two objects, that's spatial panning, whereas multiple objects all at once is immersive panning, potentially.
It depends. It depends on how you define immersive. The adjective.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's used for a wide variety of definitions of meanings.
Oh yeah, no, I've had arguments with people saying I've experienced,
but anyway,
where it's just stereo and it's more immersive than any immersive mix I've ever listened to. It's all about the environment as well.
Yeah, I mean, what counts is the end result, and if you are immersed in the music because you feel it's inside and you feel well, then that's also kind of immersive. And one more thing is that with Dolby Atmos Composer, you can have a 3D reverb with Spacelab. Our product Spacelab connects directly to the Dolby Atmos Composer. That's basically the only 3D reverb for which you can use on any DAW, which directly connects to the Dolby Atmos Composer. A few clicks and you have it already in there, and you just send your tracks there, and you can position them in space. You have a nice surrounding 3D reverb, so it's more than just Dolby Atmos. This is a mixing environment, if you want, which you can put on top of your stereo mix, or you can mix Atmos right from the start.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think some people don't realize just how powerful the Spacelab reverb is compared to even a multi-channel reverb. Coming back to the immersive context, there's a lot more you can do with it.
Yeah. So it is a full ecosystem. So I think that is a good point. And honestly, I haven't kind of. It surprises me a little that I haven't thought about that, but you guys are absolutely right. Essentially, kind of the Dolby Atmos Composer is, in principle, from the basic idea that you put it on top of a stereo mix is very similar to what Mixbus has, with the main difference that it is much more powerful. So interesting. I didn't think about that. So any other news, or kind of we already in the Dolby Atmos Composer discussion?
I think we're into Fiedler land now.
We are in Fiedler land. Yes. So
I haven't got anything else anyway.
So Thomas, first of all, thank you for kind of joining us.
My pleasure.
When the Dolby Atmos Composer came out last year, many of us were extremely excited because it really kind of was a paradigm shift. Suddenly, you could use any digital audio workstation or almost any digital audio workstation. I think there's still some issues with Pro Tools, but you could use any audio workstation, digital audio workstation, and do Dolby Atmos with the Composer at a price that was very affordable, quite frankly. So I'm kind of let me start the discussion by kind of how came the Dolby Atmos Composer to be? Can you kind of elaborate a little, sort of the history of how that came about?
Yeah, basically the history is that since you can say almost 25 years, I'm interested in spatial audio, and audio comes from everywhere. And well, it's not so much about things swirling around your head, but it's about natural hearing, actually, because when we don't listen to music, we don't have on any headphones, also we always listen in 3D. 3D is the natural way to listen, and to go to spatial audio, any kind of spatial audio, whatever it is, simple multi-channel audio, or be it Dolby Atmos or MPEG-H or whatever format, is meant to actually fulfill that hearing, to fully use your hearing capacity to actually give you the maximum listening experience, if you want to say it like this. And I was working some years with Fraunhofer Institute, the inventors of MP3. That is the most famous thing what they did, and they also are the inventors of MPEG-H.
We actually had them on the podcast not that long ago.
Yeah. Yannick, I know.
Yeah, Yannick.
So I know him personally, and while I was in the Fraunhofer Institute working with them, they developed this 3D reverb algorithm, which is now on Spacelab, And I was fascinated from the start because they have a super huge 3D audio studio with, I don't know, 62 channels, which is really impressive. They have so many channels because you can switch between many different formats, and then they use the channels which I need for that. And the moment they put on this 3D reverb, I was like, "Bah, this is how reverb has to be." Because it surrounded you. It was totally natural. It is without any artifact, even without any kind of modulation. Usually, especially older reverbs, they use modulation to somehow smooth out the tail, to not get some kind of metallic sound or artifacts or whatever, or some repetition patterns or something like that. So they try to smooth it out by using their tricks. But this algorithm, I could say, is so sovereign in its field that you just put it on without any modulation, and it just sounds like a natural room. Many people have asked me, what are the impulse responses? Can I load impulse responses? But it's an algorithmic reverb, but which comes close to the sonic fidelity of an impulse response. But it's extremely flexible. It's around you, and then when I was working there in Fraunhofer, the question came up, well, how can we make that available to the people? And then I said, well, we could do it a commercial plugin. And then they asked many different companies, and well, then the rest. Fiedler Audio got the job. So we made Spacelab, and then I thought, well, Spacelab in itself is a nice idea, but how to get that to the producers, and what can producers actually do with that, so that it gets to the people? I mean, of course, if you are in a film production, you already have a multi-channel DAW like Pro Tools, you just put it on as a multi-channel reverb, then you send your stuff there, and you have a nice reverb. But what about all the musicians and everybody who's on a stereo DAW? And what about musicians at all? And then the time came where Dolby Atmos became big in the music field and was promoted by Dolby. And I also saw that the big distributors jumped on the train. And I said, well, that might be a game changer, which brings spatial audio to the common people, so to speak. Because before, 20 years ago, there was the big hype, or more than 20 years ago, there was a big hype about 5.1, and it never took off because it was too complicated for the people to actually listen to. So people would have to set 6 speakers in their living room with a very low wife acceptance factor. So not many people did that, and so it actually it was never really a thing for the masses. But now with Dolby Atmos, which you can listen to on headphones, that thing has the potential to become the next stereo, if you will. And so I said, well, we have to find a solution for how everyone can access this potential. And with Spacelab, I already had developed the technology with which you can connect one plugin to the other, circumventing the limitations of the DAW. And I said, well, that's predestined to be used for something, so that to create Dolby Atmos on any DAW. And initially,
so interesting. The kind of this connectivity kind of started out with Spacelab. Spacelab was the one where you actually implemented that. That's interesting.
Yeah, this is an idea which I had, I don't know, 2015 to use it. I saw it in other products before, like the SAD of Tom Ammerman is doing something similar. And that one came out much earlier. And I thought, but this product, the SAD of Tom Ammerman is very complicated for most people. It's a little bit. Sorry, Tom. It's a little bit nerdy, the GUI, but the idea is good, and it should just be made in such a way that it is more accessible for anyone.
So just to clarify, for SAD, we are speaking about the Spatial Audio Designer. I think that's, Spatial
Audio Designer. And I implemented it for Spacelab, and then I said, well, that's predestined to be used for Dolby Atmos solution. Well, prior to that, I thought I will, because Spacelab came out with the MPEG-H exporter, which is another plugin to which Spacelab can connect directly to export MPEG-H. And I thought to make something similar for Dolby Atmos. But then while developing the idea, I said, no, that has to be something different so that people don't need Spacelab, but they can just have a solution with which they can do Dolby Atmos on any DAW, and Spacelab can connect to it. So, and then you already have some kind of ecosystem with which you can do really, I mean, Dolby Atmos, not only Dolby Atmos, but Dolby Atmos with a reverb, which is up to the task of feeding Dolby Atmos with something nice sounding. And on any DAW, because I think this is the way to go. The plugins democratized the music making industry, and this is just a logical step to me.
Yeah. No, everything that becomes successful essentially does become simpler over time for the general man, woman to use, and that's why it becomes popular. It doesn't become popular even because it's amazingly good or brilliant. That helps, but everything becomes popular because it becomes easy to achieve the same or a similar result to what used to be only possible in a professional context, I think. You know, you could argue MP3 is essentially that. It became so easy to use MP3 that it completely replaced a complicated burning on a CD drive in a PC stuck in the corner of a room. That's quite complicated for most people.
Yeah.
So anyway.
The classic technology disruption, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, Thomas. You implemented that in such a way that it can be used for every digital audio workstation, but that must be a nightmare to make sure that it works everywhere, right?
Not so much because, well, of course you have to test it on. I mean, we have a list of DAWs for which we tested it, and the most extensive list you can see in the demo sessions which come with our mixing tutorial videos. There you can see on which DAWs we tested it. I think it's 15 for making music, and nightmare. Well, you have to test. I mean, any plugin producer has to, or plugin company has to test their plugins on the DAWs to be able to, or to be compatible as much as possible. So that's nothing out of the ordinary, so to speak.
Is there more of a challenge on that testing side because you're not bypassing the DAW in as much as the VST is hosted, or the AAX is hosted within the DAW itself?
Yeah.
But obviously the audio itself is not a DAW-rooted audio. I assume it's kind of interacting directly with the memory on the computer. Is that right? So you kind of like the audio in between the beam and the composer is not flowing through the DAW itself. Is that am I right in thinking that?
Yeah. The audio and the metadata, if you will, from Beam to Dolby Atmos Composer are going in a separate route, which is not through the mixing engine. That makes it possible. That makes it possible to be used on any DAW because the mixing engine, most mixing engines are too limited, and there's no mixing engine which can actually transport metadata.
Yeah. Good point.
But I think they're kind of, if I remember correctly, and I'm honestly not quite up to date about that, but you ran into issues with latency compensation on Pro Tools, for example, right? Was that?
Yeah. Well, it's not strictly latency compensation. It's about something. There are also other DAWs which have the same problem. But Pro Tools was one of the first where we discovered it, and this is it's an extremely old bug. There is a whole forum thread with 60, 70 entries where people are speaking up and trying to push Avid to finally fixed it, because it's not only affecting the Dolby Atmos composer, but it's affecting basically anything which needs to be synchronous to the beat. So, for example, if in Pro Tools you have first on a track you have first a plugin which creates a significant latency, and then after that you have a plugin which relies on being synchronous to the beat, you are out of sync. Because Pro Tools doesn't communicate the correct position, which should be corrected by the delay produced before the plugin, before the synchronous plugin, to this plugin, so it doesn't have the correct information, and therefore it cannot play back the beat correctly. And we practically use the same information to automatically under the hood synchronize everything which comes from the different beams anywhere they are. If they get the right information, the Dolby Atmos composer can automatically synchronize every incoming stream, and everything comes in perfectly. But since Pro Tools doesn't communicate that correctly, it's not possible. I mean, you can have a workaround. You can create buses, set up your beams there, then send everything to the bus, and you don't do anything on the bus before, which creates latency. But you do anything on your channels, and then you send to the buses, and thereby you circumvent this latency problem. Or if you know the latency, you can also put it in the about screen of the beam. You can put in the latency which is produced up to this point, and well, then you are also, this is a manual task, but you can also manually synchronize the things. But it's on big session, it's tedious. So I hope that Pro Tools or Avid is solving that soon. There's a discussion going on, and Avid is looking at this, but they still didn't get around. I mean, I don't know what is so difficult about it, because most other DAWs do that, but they didn't solve it until now. And all the people who create beats or make something which is synchronous to the beat are basically freaking out about this.
Yeah. Well, it only takes a few samples before some things just don't sound right anymore.
Yeah. And imagine you take an ozone. Imagine taking an ozone with a latency of 5,000 samples, and you're completely off.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you might as well just guess.
Interesting. No, but in Pro Tools, you can actually activate the latency display below in the mixer. There's an option if you activate it.
That's right. Yeah.
Every track shows the latency below, and then you basically can calculate. We have a video on our YouTube channel which explains how to do that.
Yeah. I remember that. And by the way, for those of you who are watching on YouTube or any other kind of platform where there is a comment section, we are going to kind of post the links in the description so that you guys can kind of check it out. And I highly recommend kind of checking it out. Now, the Dolby Atmos Composer comes in two versions, right? Yes. There's like an essential version and kind of at some point you made one of them free, right?
Yes. Well, of course, the essential version we made free. Because, well, our idea was, again, Atmos to the people. And, I mean, we wanted to give Atmos tools into the hands of everyone, basic Atmos tools, so that they can start doing the thing. And when they want to get serious, of course, they should buy the big version, because there are things which are quite necessary, which are not in the essential version. With the essential version, you basically have the same feature set as you have in Logic Pro. This was more or less the idea for the essential version, and also you can connect Spacelab to essential, which is some killer feature for free software. And but that's it. So you can start creating full-fledged Dolby Atmos on any DAW for free. Well, and when you get more proficient and you want to really fine-tune your things, and you need loudness measurement and other things, then you need the big version.
But I think for the average kind of bedroom producer, I think the Essentials version is just fine to get started, right? I mean, it's actually amazingly powerful for the fact that it's free.
Yeah, for starting is good, but once you want to deliver to distributors, you need some kind of loudness measurement. And well, you can, if you have something for that which can actually do the job in the correct way, congrats. If not, Dolby Atmos Composer, the full version, has it built in, where you can measure the loudness of your mix, and well, you can also measure the loudness of an imported ADM file. So once you have produced the ADM file and the distributor says no, we don't take it because this and that, you don't need to go back to the mix. You can load the ADM file, correct the loudness, re-export. This is very quick, and read and send it back to the distributor.
So when you look back at the development of the Dolby Atmos Composer, what are the things that you are most proud of, and what are the things that you kind of wish you would have known earlier, or kind of things that kind of didn't work out as well?
Good question. I'm happy that the Dolby Atmos Composer was so well received. We got a lot of very, very good feedback, and last year we also had a very nice feature in the Sound and Sound magazine about the Dolby Atmos Composer and all its bells and whistles. And yeah, we will continue to do that. About things which I regret, well, nothing actually. There's also nothing where I would say I would have done it differently. A few details maybe, but nothing really important, and nothing which couldn't be solved which cannot be solved by adding something new or some feature addition to the Dolby Atmos Composer in the future.
Yeah. Was there any pushback from Dolby in terms of you had to do something a certain way? Obviously, they've got their quality control, I guess, side of it, that they want to maintain the ADMs consistent and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But were they quite flexible in terms of, because obviously I think, well, you still are the only plug-in version of the Dolby Atmos renderer. So I didn't know if there was any resistance there, or whether they went with it.
Well, they were in the beginning. There was, because when before Spacelab came out, I already asked them, because I had in mind I want to do something for Dolby Atmos, and they didn't react. Once Spacelab came out, they reacted. Because they saw that I know what I'm doing, and then we talked it over. And first, I told them, as the initial idea was to make something similar to the MPEG-H exporter, I want to do a Dolby Atmos exporter. And they were okay, and then it developed further into a separate product, and basically, I had all the freedom in the world. I mean, it was actually, as you said, of course, I have to go through the certification process. So they test the Dolby Atmos Composer if it complies with the specifications for the Dolby Atmos rendering and for the ADM import and export, because those are basically the three functions of what the Dolby Atmos renderer does. It renders it so that you can monitor it. It exports an ADM file, and it imports ADM files. And that they were testing, but apart from that, they never complained about anything. They were skeptical in the beginning if it is possible to do Dolby Atmos in form of a plugin, but I knew it would be, so I did it. Because I mean, MPEG-H exporter already was basically the testing ground. So yeah, it is possible to do some kind of that, something like that. So sure. I knew it's just a matter of working it out.
yeah. I mean, the ADM's relatively, other than the little bit that Dolby tag on in terms of the metadata, is the ADM's a standard format as well. So it's not like you are entering into an unknown deliverable. It's kind of like it's already there. Kind of open.
And you have to go through that certification every time you do an update, or kind of how does this work?
No, I don't. I only have to go through the certification if I change something what affects directly the Dolby Atmos rendering, importing or exporting part. If that changes, then I have to go through the certification.
Okay.
For the new upcoming version of the Dolby Atmos Composer, we have to go through because there will be something new inside. And but if I do just fixes, or for example, if I do something additional inside Dolby Atmos Beam to give some more features, I don't, because it's not affecting the part which has to be certified.
So there's not some quality control like Apple does, for example, where you essentially every update kind of goes through a quality control kind of mechanism. So they trust you.
Well, they do quality control. They check that the plugin works, that it's not crashing and stuff like this, because they do extensive testing. And what they certify is that what comes out of it is legit Dolby Atmos. It's comparable to any other Dolby Atmos implementation, like their own Dolby Atmos renderer or any native integration into any DAW. So this is all. They all produce exactly the same thing. If you do the same thing in the penner and stuff like that, it will do the same thing.
The one thing that I always found interesting is that and the way you explain that is even more interesting to me, because it for the outside people, it looks like Dolby is very protective of their kind of rendering and everything. I mean, the fact, for example, that you still can't use the Dolby Atmos renderer on Windows machines because there are certain components missing is kind of telling. And then essentially Fiddle Audio comes along and kind of just does that. And that I always found interesting. And now that you say that it was actually relatively easy for you, is there any secret that you had that kind of that made Dolby say yes, Thomas Fiedler, but nobody else?
They are not restrictive about it. If another plugin company comes along or whatever and wants to do something, I think they are open to it. They just want to get it out to as many people as possible, or as many products, so to speak, to integrate it in as many products as possible. But of course, since the Dolby Atmos Composer is out, so no other plugin company needs to do anything about it, because we are already doing it. And
they'll only be copying anyway.
And when it comes to the Dolby Atmos renderer of Dolby themselves, well, I think they don't take it so. They don't push the thing anymore so much, because. Anyway, if you have an integrated solution or the Dolby Atmos Composer, why use the renderer where the connection to it is so complicated? So I think the Dolby Atmos renderer will soon become a thing of the past when, for example, Dolby makes available MP4 production or MP4 encoding for the rest of us who do Dolby Atmos. This is one thing which is still where you still need the Dolby Atmos renderer, or you go to Amazon web systems or web services. But the only local software which does that currently is the Dolby Atmos renderer. But once they offer that to us third-party solution makers, then that will also be a thing of the past, and in most cases, you won't need the Dolby Atmos renderer ever anymore. That's why I think they will not spend so much programming effort in that in future versions of that.
Yeah,
I think otherwise they would have made a Windows solution which is on par with the Mac version.
Is there any indication sorry, Sam, but that's a question I get a lot. Is there any indication that the MP4 is coming to third-party developers? Because I get that question constantly from people who kind of say, I kind of want to do that and I can't do that anyway. I need either EWS or the renderer. Is there any indication from somebody who works on the kind of on something that kind of could potentially kind of become a major thing?
The only thing I am allowed to say is I keep pushing and the hopes are high.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's. I guess a lot of people are pushing, right?
Yeah. The more people are pushing, but don't push us, push Dolby, because it depends on Dolby. Because the MP4 is also proprietary to Dolby, so it's not that I can just take any MP4 encoder and just encode it in some way. It must be their algorithm, otherwise it's not the thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I was reading between the lines when I was requesting. It's mainly the only thing that would really stop you using the renderer with any DAW is the Dolby Atmos Panner, which is sending all the metadata, and the binaural. Is it the binaural plugin as well? I think it is. I think they're the two key plugins that Dolby don't make in Windows format.
The fact that
reading between the lines, I got the impression they think, oh, the renderer is probably not going to be around, so it will become irrelevant whether we've got a Dolby Windows plugin set, because you're not going to need it anyway.
I mean, even if you see recent Dolby presentations where they present Dolby Atmos production solutions in public to some audience, they present the integrated solutions and the Dolby Atmos Composer, also the renderer, but among the other solutions. So if you have it integrated, it's the integrated solution. Once you have an integrated solution, which is not overly simplified like in Mixbus, then it's better than the actual renderer in most cases.
Yeah, no, you don't choose to connect everything with an LTC. Synchronization and lots of additional hardware and even second computers to do something with. You don't need that anymore.
Major PITA.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, I've wasted many an hour trying to get Dolby Atmos renderer to work in all sorts of ways that I didn't plan.
and by the way, for everybody watching, there are very interesting videos on Sam's main channel. Just recently, kind of where I was playing around with the Dolby Atmos renderer and kind of connecting it to Pro Tools on Windows. But kind of we are missing the panning thing.
No, panning will work.
Pro Tools, right? Exactly. For Pro
panning
Tools, it works actually.
Comes
right?
out of Pro Tools, so because it's even the Windows version sends the metadata out. So I just connected a second PC over an Ethernet cable.
Interesting.
So Pro Tools found the renderer on the other. Well, it's a laptop. It's on a tablet, actually, a Surface tablet.
Yeah, I just tested it for
all the panning metadata goes across. The LTC sync goes across, obviously, it's just audio. And this is all possible because Dolby updated to support Jack audio, which allows JackNet, which is network-based audio, which is kind of like Dante, but without the hardware.
Yeah, cool.
So, have a look if you're interested in still using Dolby Atmos renderer.
Sam's channel. I kind of adjusted it for Nuendo, and Nuendo crashes totally.
Not everything likes Jack audio, unfortunately.
It's not set up for kind of do that. Thomas, you already kind of hinted a little bit. What's and kind of I know that you cannot kind of talk about everything, but kind of what can people expect from the Dolby Atmos renderer in the future? From the Dolby Atmos Composer in the future.
Composer. They can expect to get more features. To make more interesting or to make more for your Dolby Atmos mixes, Dolby Atmos mastering, and what more can I say? It will evolve, that's for sure, and it most probably will evolve faster than the rest of the pack, because Mammoth moves slowly, but we are not the Mammoth. So there will be in about a month we will have a very interesting release, a bigger release with a lot of new features in Dolby Atmos Composer that I can say, which will really be that the Dolby Atmos product way ahead of the crowd. And I think Sam can confirm that. And so
it's yeah.
That's enough of
I
teasing.
can't say anything. So I dare not say anything because it'll accidentally come out.
And we already kind of in ahead of this episode, we were already talking that we are probably going to kind of have Thomas come up again, like in 2 months or so, because there's something really major in the works. So get the Dolby Atmos Composer.
No.
Yeah. And if you get the free one, upgrade after.
No. Good idea.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions from our Discord community. If you're up for it, kind of the and those are kind of quite frankly relatively straightforward questions, partly. And a lot of people have asked about the user interface, and I'm going to combine kind of two questions that I have. The first one was with respect to scalable or responsive user interface, and the second one was with respect to having some sort of visualization similar to the Dolby Atmos renderer, where you have like a three-dimensional view of everything. Are there any things that are planned, or is this something that you're thinking about?
Well, both things are on the list because we have received the same requests. Regarding the scalability, that will most probably, when it comes, it will come for the Dolby Atmos Beam, because then you have more space where you can push around, move around your objects. And well, otherwise it doesn't make much sense. And the object view, like it is in the Dolby Atmos renderer, well, yeah, I mean, it's on the list because people requested it. But to be honest, it's a toy, this view, because it doesn't tell you anything actually. I mean, you can.
It doesn't even relate to your speakers. And
the only ever serious use I found with it is when I was debugging Dolby Atmos Composer for how it renders, or how it puts the objects into the ADM, and I loaded the ADM into the Dolby Atmos render, and I looked what was the Dolby Atmos Composer actually doing in the ADM file. So for debugging, it's good.
It's excellent debugging.
Otherwise, it's a toy. I mean, you see the whole the bubbles fly around, but you cannot make any conclusive. You cannot draw any conclusion about how it sounds. You need to listen to it.
Yeah, there's not much mix use.
And there's one more thing. Well, it of course can be put into such a view in case I do that. But the Dolby Atmos Composer only shows you objects. It doesn't show you the bad. So the bad channels do not appear there, which I don't know why they did it. But if I would want to have a visualization, I would want to see everything. But they didn't do it. And who knows why?
The renderer you were talking about, the Dolby Atmos renderer. Yeah. That's true. It does not do that. That's correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it is a debugging thing, right? It's kind of I use that quite often if I do something, kind of just to make sure. Like for example with Mixbus, I just wanted to make sure that it comes out the way it's supposed to. So I load it up in the renderer and see if everything is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Now the only thing I think I ever used it for was you can switch on the binaural view so that you can see each binaural mode of each object. As a net group of objects. That's quite useful, especially when you're trying to do the sort of drier front, and then you go a mid and then a far kind of setting on sounds behind you and stuff or whatever. That can be quite useful. More to see that you've messed up a setting and that's why it sounds a bit weird, because you've got one object that's off or whatever and it's skewed up the binaural completely. That's quite useful for that, like a binaural viewer, like a vision thing. But apart from that, pretty useless really.
But kind of you're right, because in the composer, because you have these composites, right?
Yeah.
you would have to actually show the bad channels.
Yeah. I mean, when you just make a 916 composite,
Yeah,
it is composed of a 712 bed
yeah,
and 6 more objects for the missing channels. So when you load that into the Dolby Atmos renderer, you see 6 static bubbles which don't move.
yeah.
So, and many and some people get confused. What are those bubbles? These are not objects I put there. Why are they appearing bubbles?
Yeah, that's true.
And then you have to explain to
yeah.
them, hey, you use the 916 composite, which is actually a trick. It's not a real Dolby Atmos standard format. But even, funnily, even Dolby themselves, they recognize that everyone is doing that trick.
Yeah.
Be it you construct your bed through objects only and you put them wherever you want, or you do the trick the Dolby Atmos Composer does, because one question in the questionnaire for certification is, can your software do more than 7.1.2 beds? So they know about it. They know about it because since Dolby Atmos came out, people asked, why do we have 7.1.2 beds, but an output format or rendering format of 7.1.4? Doesn't make sense. Because with the bed, you cannot feed the output format completely. So you would have to make some tricks. You have to put some objects there. Maybe take just a 7.1 bed and have your 4 objects above, or you make everything of objects, and then you have to make some routing tricks to actually pen onto that construction. And well, the Dolby Atmos Composer takes off the heavy lifting from that. You just select 916, you send your stuff there, and done you are.
Yeah. I always, when people have asked me about how to use it or what kind of how to understand it, I just say, look, the 7.1.2, if you want to use it, just imagine that is each speaker is a static object, and it's just an object that you can't move. When it gets into the ADM, essentially it is an object. Really, it's not any different. It's just that you can't do anything with it. You can't move it. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes that just confuses even more.
Yeah. I mean, that's the bed. The bed is it's a historical invention, actually.
Yeah,
because Dolby Atmos evolved from prior Dolby formats, which were channel based, and now they put some objects on top of it. But the bed itself remained, so they somehow selected that. I think the 7.1.2 is historically connected to Pro Tools, to what Pro Tools could do at this time. And that's about it. And actually, if you that's just a tip. If you mix for Dolby Atmos, try to always use 916 as a composite in the Dolby Atmos Composer, because this gives you a higher resolution, and you won't have unused speakers. For example, if you use a 7.1.2 bed, then and you play back the audio on that bed on a 916 speaker system, you have 6 unused channels. The speakers are simply silent. They are not used. And if you pan something, it doesn't touch those speakers. But if you already do it on a 916 composite, then you actually come out everywhere. Or you just do objects. Then some people would follow the idea only to use objects, because then they have exactly what they want, and they are not bound to fixed positions. That's a philosophy thing, and it might come the day that beds are completely ditched and you only deal with objects and with nothing else.
Yeah.
When you decided to implement, when you decided to implement those composites, right? That was very early. I mean, and you still, to some extent, are the only software that does that. I mean, Pro Tools has these templates, I think, where you can sort of do something like that. But you're the only one. I'm kind of curious. When did you make that decision to kind of do composites? Was this very early on, or is this something that was added as you were developing?
It was right from the start because I'm an audio engineer myself, and when I was working on Space Lab, I had contact with many 3D audio engineers, and we naturally talked about Dolby Atmos and how they do it. And almost everyone tells me that they do some kind of trickery to get more than 7.1.2 when they want to do panning to a static set, when they want to put many audio channels onto a fixed set of speakers, of speaker positions, that they all do this some kind of trickery. And then I said, well, this is something, why do you have to do it manually? You can automate that. And so you just select the format and the program is doing it for you. Done.
I think if anybody hasn't used the Beam plugin, I think that's its biggest strength for me. There's the flexibility of being able to control all the spatial speakers positions in terms of, if you just want a mono object, you can set that track to be a mono object. If you want it to be 916, it can be 916. If you want to separate out even parts of that beam, you can take that to other places because it's just a VST plugin. And if your DAW can route it, then you can kind of take it to other panners, even if you wanted to afterwards. So it's quite powerful how it's set up in terms of the panner is more about thinking about speakers at that point, which is where you want to be thinking about speakers, is in the panel, whereas the Dolby panner is more about just where is it in the room almost. I think I think a lot of people miss the fact that that little bubble floating around isn't actually where your sound necessarily will come from or feel like it's coming from. It could be coming from more likely from where the speaker is, because that's where it is.
There's even one more thing which only Dolby Atmos Beam is doing, and this is Dolby. Actually, in all the implementations, be it the Dolby Atmos renderer or the Dolby Atmos implementation in the DAWs or the Dolby Atmos Composer, all the implementations is actually Dolby Atmos Home. It's derived from the original Dolby Atmos, which is used in the cinemas, but this is Dolby Atmos Home, which is kind of a reduced version. So in the original Dolby Atmos, they have on the upper level, where we can have maximum 6 speakers for 916, they have actually 10 speaker positions, 10 possible speaker positions. So if you take any Dolby Atmos panner, which is usually this cube thing where you have X, Y, Z coordinates, and then you can move your objects on the top plane, and when you go close to the corners, then you can move them around inside the corners, and nothing happens sonically. This is because they have just, from Dolby Atmos Home, they have just taken out these positions and they just like bounce it down to the others, to the adjacent speakers, to the front top and the rear top of the 916 setup. And since you know that the Dolby Atmos Beam is not using the cubic coordinate system, but a polar coordinate system where you use angles and distances to the listener, I convert the polar coordinates in such a way that you, well, not I do it, but the Dolby Atmos Beam does it, that you actually, wherever you move this, whenever you move this to anywhere, the object, it always has the adequate sonic response. So it always sounds in the way it should, so that you don't get to those dead zones in the upper layer of the Dolby Atmos. And it also correctly distorts or equalizes or undistorts, to say, the other coordinates. For example, in a normal speaker setup, you have your stereo left and right, you have at 30 degrees. But if you go look at the cubic coordinate system, if you want to place your object in those speakers, you have to go to 45 degrees because it's a cube. So it's distorted actually. And with the polar coordinate system, we actually undistorted it, so that where you place your object, there it should sound.
Yeah, but there's very question or topic came up today in Michael's Discord where somebody was saying, well, when I pan in the Dolby Atmos panner, I pan from the front left and I just pan vertically up, it goes exclusively up into the height speaker. Whereas they're just going up vertically, basically. Whereas going up vertically in the beam is not exactly the same. And I said, well, yes, it can't be the same because that vertical space that you've just panned into in the cube panner is a dead area. There's not actually anything there. You've already gone past the extreme of that height speaker. So going further forward doesn't bring it close to the speaker because it's actually already past it, really, in reality.
If you put a 916 speaker setup into this cube and the 6 speakers are on top, the corners have to be dead because your object can only move on the lines between the speakers or on the areas which are formed by the speakers when you think of them as the corner of these triangles or something like that. Only there your object can actually move, and so the corners, they are naturally dead.
Yeah, the value increases. Is it 2? It's 1.0, isn't it? So when you're exactly on the speaker, the value is 1. But if you carry on past the speaker forwards in the cube, it's still 1 because it doesn't start decreasing because there's not another channel that object can output to. It's already fully output. It takes a little while to understand that, but it's quite important. I think that's why I quite like this polar panel more than the cube panel. Although I know that's probably quite a common question you get is why didn't you implement a square panel?
Sometimes yes, but then I give that explanation because there are basically those two advances. First, I can take off this distortion. I can just take it out of the way of your mixing work because now you can just move the object around, and wherever you go, there it is. Where it should be.
And it has a change as well. You actually hear it change. Whereas
exactly. You hear the appropriate change, and the polar coordinate system is actually the one which should be used in that case because it's listener centric. I mean, the cubic coordinate system suggests some kind of a room. And many people say, if I move in Dolby Atmos the object from the one corner of the room to the other, but it's not a room, it's just a fake room. If you want to know what a room is, use Spacelab. And there you have a room because then there is reverberation attributed to this. There's a real distance attributed so that you can actually move an object through a real room and come close to the listener. And in Dolby Atmos, whenever you move an object through the room, it actually spreads the object out on the rest of the speakers. It spreads the object out around you. It's necessary to do it this way because if you want to make movements through the listener, like something is coming like this, then if you won't do this kind of spreading out, and on the back, taking away the spreading, you would have a jump like front, boom, rear, and you don't have a smooth movement. So that's necessary. But that's also the reason why experts like Andrew Shepp says balls to the walls. Means objects always outside. Try to avoid pulling it inside. Try to leave it on the outer rim, so to say, because those objects are really point sources and not spread out. Only do the spreading out if you know what you're doing. If you have a specific reason, otherwise don't.
No, wise words. Yeah.
We are starting to inch up on the end of our recording session. I have 2 more questions and then sort of one remark. And I'm going to combine the 2 questions into one because there's a kind of technical, really very, very technical question, and I'm not quite sure if you even can answer those. But the first one was, are there any plans to bring in Ambisonics into the mix? I mean, kind of, for example, like a beam plugin for Ambisonics. And the other one was, do you have any plans to release the Composer in a club version?
regarding ambisonics, there are no current plans. Well, there are. If you are on a multi-channel DAW, you can use some kind of converter to make it multi-channel and then go into the Dolby Atmos beam. But otherwise, it's not. And I think you anyway need a multi-channel DAW to be able to work with ambisonics. So you already have to be on a system which can cope with multi-channel. So just use one of the converters and then go into the Dolby Atmos beam. I mean, if I would have to implement something like that, it would be the same. It would convert the ambisonics to some channel-based layout, and then send it to the Dolby Atmos beam.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess the question probably came because of the Da Vinci kind of thing. So that's it. It's true. Kind of this conversion can be a little bit complicated in DAWs that are particular about the track layout. Kind of if you might need to kind of route things around. I'm thinking of Pro Tools or even Studio One. Well, Studio One doesn't do ambisonic.
Yeah.
Right?
I think a lot of DAWs, they don't give you a huge. DaVinci Resolve is an exception. There's very few DAWs that can allow you to create the track width that you want flexibly. If a DAW that could do that on the fly would be so powerful, because you could almost interchange formats within the same session. Well, yeah,
I already hear the people screaming, Reaper.
Yeah.
Well, Reaper.
I'm not sure it's exactly how I'm describing it though. You still, I don't think you can.
I mean, what you can do, for example, on Pro Tools, since you mentioned Pro Tools, in Pro Tools, well, the higher orders, really higher orders, is not possible at the moment to use with Dolby Atmos Beam. You could practically use Spacelab to receive 64 channels in, and then send it over, and then you put them somewhere in space, and then send it over to the Atmos Composer. The Dolby Atmos Beam is capable of up to 16 channels, so you can basically put it on a third order ambisonics channel, receive the third order ambisonic signal, or convert the third order ambisonic signal to some kind of 16 channels or whatever you want to have, and then you then you send it into the Dolby Atmos Beam. These channels, you can place the objects inside the Dolby Atmos Beam to wherever you want. To wherever you need it to correctly represent the conversion, so to speak. So then you can get a converted ambisonics signal into the Dolby Atmos Composer. That would be the way.
Yeah.
But
the other way you could do it. So I'm going to say that just the thought. The other way that you could do it, you've got the secondary output on Composer, where you've got your Dolby Atmos speaker output natively, but then you've got that secondary output as well, haven't you? If you've got multiple audio devices, you can route almost a copy of the session. So you could route that through the Atmos conversion to just have a final output in an ambisonics format, even though it's all driven, even though it's all driven from output. Do you know what I mean? You know, the external secondary output in the Composer. Because it's a plugin, you can just route that audio to another plugin and convert it. You could do it that way.
Okay, so you want to get the output of the Dolby Atmos Composer as an ambisonics.
Yeah, because you just convert the speaker positions to ambisonics.
Well, in the beginning,
if it was 16.
In the beginning, when we created the Dolby Atmos Composer, the Dolby Atmos renderer, which we got as the output format, only supports in the higher channel counts 714 and 916. And then people came to me, what about 914? I have a studio with 914. neither serves me well because 714 leaves out 2 channels, and 916 has 2 channels which I cannot send anywhere natively. I would have to make some tricks. And then I remembered that in the Dolby Atmos renderer you can basically construct your stuff if you want. And then I asked Dolby, what about that? And they say, no, currently not, but maybe later. And so I always had to tell the people, well, you have to somehow live with that. But I can say, but this is something I can say in the new update. We will have 914 and we will have also 712 output. Imagine that. Not only 714, but 712. This is something new which is coming now. And so all the people with the 914 setups can now cheer up. Dolby Atmos Composer works natively with your setup. And but I asked Dolby, and they were not very happy about if I would do it myself, because everything what is output from the Dolby Atmos Composer is done by the Dolby Atmos rendering algorithm. There's nothing which I put on top to make any kind of conversion. And they were not very happy when I asked them if I can convert 916 to 914. So I didn't do it. And well, I think with Ambisonics it wouldn't be so difficult because it's so far off any channel-based or any channel-based thing format. So maybe they would not be so. Maybe they wouldn't care, or they would be happy. I don't know. Things change also.
Yeah.
But what I mean, actually, if you want to, actually, it would be only for some people who want to do some special stuff, because actually when you want to produce Dolby Atmos, you want to listen to Dolby Atmos the way it is reproduced then later for the consumers. So you go either binaural or any kind of speaker layout, and the output to Ambisonics is technically possible, but I don't think there are many users which actually need it.
Yeah. And the club version?
The club version. What do you mean by club version? What is missing from the club version?
Essentially, that's the new plugin format. I think that was it Bitwig who kind of pushed that one? Clap.
Clap. Oh, sorry.
Clap.
Yeah.
Oh, clap.
No, sorry. Yeah, kind of my German accent.
I understood
kind of,
club like for the techno club. No. Okay.
No. Clap.
Clap. Okay.
There's only a few doors that support it. But.
Currently, there are a few doors which support it, but is there any clap-only door?
No, I don't think so.
That I'm aware of.
Okay.
I know it's kind of headed up by the Bitwig team and what are those plugins? Uli, I think his name is, or Yuri. Anyway, it's quite a respected plugin developer. But it's an open format, so I guess that's why people are asking, because Linux crowd can then use it and stuff as well, which probably is where clap is more popular, I'd say, possibly.
Well, I'm having a look at it from time to time, and at some point when it becomes more necessary, more popular, we might do that. Since there are no clap-only DAWs, we don't feel that pressure to do it right now, because in any DAW you can use one of the existing plugin formats and work with that.
True.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons that the question came because there are some additional features apparently that clap has, and the one that was mentioned was sample accurate automation. I'm not quite sure if that's a big deal.
Yeah, well, sample accurate automation is something we really want to do, but it's very, very, very far from trivial, and it's actually also possible in the other plugin formats, but the different ways of doing it. And every format does it somehow differently, and we know it's important, and we are looking into it and trying to find a solution. But I cannot tell you right now when we will actually be able to tackle it in such a way that it is seamless, that you just put it on and you do this simple accurate automation, and you don't have to think about any additional setup or whatever.
Yeah. A lot of that is kind of native to DAWs, like the audio rate modulation and stuff like that, where you are modulating things with the sample rate itself almost.
Yeah. I mean,
it's a big part of Bitwig, and that's why I like it, because it's all audio rate and then beat matched audio rate as well. So it's kind of like everything's always locked. There's no danger of anything separating.
Yeah,
but I think maybe with MIDI 2 that'll become more critical, because I think MIDI 2 is meant to be supporting an audio rate type of control as well, maybe. So, but that's further down the line. There's
I mean, this is one feature request, or one planned feature, which is quite on the top of our list. So we are looking into it. This is the only thing I can say, but I cannot promise any date when we will have it.
Yeah, but it's important. There's only so many hours in the day, Thomas. You can't be coding all of this.
You are under NDA.
Yeah. So kind of, I have one final comment from our community. But before I kind of go to that comment, I wanted to ask Thomas: is there anything that you kind of we didn't touch that you think that we should kind of just mention? Anything that kind of you want to kind of throw in at the very end of this discussion?
Regarding what?
The Dolby Atmos Composer.
Oh, go and buy it. Yeah, there will be some sales in the near future, so look out.
Okay, cool. So kind of as we said, kind of go essentials and then essentially upgrade when the sales come. Okay, so this kind of leaves me with the final comment, and kind of then I thank Thomas for kind of Thomas for kind of agreeing to kind of be with us. This was an extremely interesting discussion, and the final comment essentially, and that is something that I hear a lot of in our community, and I just read it the way it was written. Thank you for your amazing work and for bringing true Dolby Atmos mixing to the masses. And I would agree with that. Essentially, you made a big impact in this community, and thank you for that. And also thank you for being on this podcast and having a chat with us. And I have a certain feeling we need to come back in the not too distant future for things that will become apparent soon. And other than that, once again, thank you. And thanks to everybody who is listening. If you are listening on a platform where you can leave comments, please do so. If you have any questions, you can also join our Discord community. I'm going to leave a link about where you can find that in the description as well. And other than that, thanks again, and see you at our next podcast.
Yeah, and and before leaving, I just want to try out. Let's see if it works here. It works.
Very good. Very good. You were saving that.
I noticed that you had that on. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. See you.